And it is now my pleasure to just to finish this opening of the symposium session, to tell you a few more words about this event and also about the LIFE FORECCAST project. First and foremost, of course, I would like to thank anyone who's been involved in the welcoming of participants. So René Moreno, Daniel Vialet, Olivier Picard, and Thais Loré, thank you very much for your time. And now I'm going to talk a bit more about this event. First of all, why is forest adaptation to climate change relevant? Well, it's, I think, quite obvious if you're here today that climate change is real and it's not getting any better. It also has a negative impact on forests. It could have, in some cases, a positive impact as well, but when you look at the overwhelming amount of articles about the impact of climate change on forests right now, especially this is just this year in like the international press about what happened with forest and climate change, it's mostly a negative impact that climate change has on forests. Third, of course, forests are important and need to be protected. They need to be protected for several reasons, for the biodiversity that they host, for the ecosystemic services that they provide, for example, concerning the water cycle, the carbon cycle, preventing soil erosion and so on. They're important to be protected for the wood they provide, which is important for economic aspects of our life as well, and also for the recreational activities, the tourism that is linked to forests. It's important for the economy, it's also important for our well-being. This is even more true in a context of climate change, that forests are important and need to be protected. Why? Because forests are right at the heart of the climate change issue. On the one hand, when forests are degraded, when there's a lot of deforestation, it increases the amount of greenhouse gas that is emitted into our atmosphere. On the other hand, when forests are healthy and growing, they can help mitigate the effect of climate change by stocking some of the carbon that's in our atmosphere. So what can we do now that we know that climate change is real, that it has a negative impact on forests and that forests are so important? There are two different kind of things that we do in these cases. The first one is to mitigate, so to reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases. The other one is, of course, to adapt forests to climate change, just to make sure that forests will still be existing despite the fact that climate change is now here, and that's why we're here today. So what can we do when we want to adapt forests to climate change? Well, the first thing, or one of the first things we can do would be to assess the risk for these forests and also to measure the impacts of climate change on forests. For example, what we did in the FORECCAST project was first, basically, to look at the map. If you look at the map of the climates in this area where the Haut-Languedoc regional park sits, you'll see that we are right at the meeting point of three different climates: the alpine climate, the Atlantic climate, and the Mediterranean climate, which means that when climate is changing, it very quickly has a huge impact on the trees growing there, because a tree, for example, which is growing under, let's say, alpine climate, if climate is changing, can suddenly have to grow under a Mediterranean climate, and it's not going to like that. So that's the first thing we did, just have a look at the type of climates we have in our area. The second one was to do an extensive soil analysis of the Haut-Languedoc regional park. If you want to know more about this soil analysis and why it is so important to have an idea of the types of soil that you've got when you're dealing with adapting forests to climate change, we have a poster about that, so I invite you to have a look at this poster. The third thing that we did to assess risks about forest and climate change in our area was to use a tool that's called BioClimSol, that is developed by the CNPF. And once again, this afternoon, you'll have an oral presentation about this tool, which will tell you more about how can this tool be used in a context of climate change for forest. The second thing that we can do to adapt forests to climate change. So that was about assessing risks. The second thing we can do is to measure impacts. How did we do that for FORECCAST? Well, once again, basically having a look around and look if we had evidence of tree dieback, of course. We also used some aerial photographies provided by the IGN that can help us to identify areas of dieback because for some tree species they turn red when they are dying. We use methods such as dépéris or archi, etc., etc. There are a lot of methods now available to measure the impact of climate change on trees and on forests. Second thing we can do to adapt forests to climate change is, of course, to test management measures, management itineraries that are adapted to climate change. We did test a lot of them in the FORECCAsT project. We did test forest management measures that were adapted to climate change for existing forest stands. For example, by increasing the amount of thinning, by helping reforestation, regeneration, these kind of things. We did that in both forests that had an objective for wood production and of conservation of a natural habitat. We also worked on plantation, on reforestation, by implementing tree arboretums where we tested species that can be better adapted for the climates to come in the Haut-Languedoc, and also by planting mixed forests, because we know that in the context of climate change, mixing species is one of the ways to increase the resilience of forests. Once again, if you want to know more about what we did about these two things, I'm not going to talk more in details today about exactly what we did, but we do have two posters talking about that are in the poster area. The third step, of course, now that we have all this knowledge about what are the risks, what are the impacts, and what we can do in terms of management, is to share this knowledge and also to build tools that can help actually applying this knowledge in the field. Because sometimes, well, maybe a bit too often, we do have the knowledge, but this knowledge is not readily accessible for forest managers, for example. So what we did in the FORECCAsT project was to build a mobile application as a tool that can be used by forest managers that includes the bioclimstol method I mentioned earlier, and that transfers this method from the scientific field to the applied field where forest managers can use it to really have a diagnosis of the forest in a context of climate change. This application is called FORECCAsT by bioclimstol, and once again we have a poster about this application, and you are more than welcome to talk about this application with people from the FORECCAsT team today. That was for tools to support decision making, concerning knowledge sharing. We did a lot of different things in the FORECCAsT project. We wrote down an action plan in case of acute climate crisis that is widely distributed to forest managers in our area. We also have some of these here if you want to take one with you. We organized in total 17 conferences in our area to talk about forest climate change, to do some outreach events basically for the general audience, but also for professionals. Just for them to know more about this issue of forest and climate change. And of course, we organize events just like this one that can help a lot of people, a lot of experts working on forest and climate change and adaptation, just to meet together and exchange ideas. If you want to know more about our outreach action, once again, we have a poster for that. So concerning now this last event, I was mentioning the symposium that we are all attending today. A bit of practical info about this symposium. What is the objectives of the symposium? What are we doing here today? Well, the objective is basically for you to have an area, a day, where you can share your experience about forest adaptation to climate change, where you can also discover new methods, new projects, because there are many people working about this issue. We've seen it's a global issue. So everywhere in the world, people are working about this issue of forest adaptation to climate change, but they do not necessarily know what is done in the next region, in the next country, and so on. So that's the whole point of this event today. And of course, you can draw inspiration from what is done in other contexts, in other countries, and bring this knowledge back home to apply it to your local context. And a few words about the organization of today. So we'll have 3 different sessions that follows the steps I was mentioning earlier about forest adaptation to climate change. The first session will be about forest and climate change risks and impacts. How can we assess risk and impacts of climate change on forest? The second session will be about adaptation of forest management to climate change, and the third one about decision-making tools and knowledge transfer. With the documents you've been provided with when you registered, you have the program and the name of the speakers for these different sessions. We will have today 16 oral presentations in total, and every 2 or 3 presentations we'll have a round of questions. So if you have a question during a presentation, please remember it, write it down, and after a few minutes, a few other presenters, you'll be able to ask this question to the presenter. We will also have 3 sessions of poster presentations at the same time than the breaks, so coffee breaks and the lunch. And today we'll have not 46, actually 47 poster presentations about other projects talking about forest adaptation to climate change everywhere in the world. And tomorrow, for the ones who register to the field visit, we will also have a day of field visits. If you registered but did not confirm yet, please do so, because we have a limited amount of space for these field visits. And if you did not register for the field visits but are interested in being involved in field visits, once again, please let us know, and if we have a spot for you, maybe we'll be able to arrange something.